Welcome back to the Dementia Collective. Today we have the pleasure of being joined by Cindy Diogo. Welcome, Cindy.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Before we get into it, though, we have a Patreon here where members of the village or who are members and they support our show on Patreon, they ask the guest a question. So here's the question that we have for you today. You ready?
Yeah.
So my mother has dementia and she needs increasing levels of care that my husband and I cannot afford. With me working full time to try and provide where I can, what recommendations do you have?
Mm. So, from my background in HR, I always say if there's opportunities to leverage what you have first, start there. So, what a lot of people don't realize with their places of employment and especially their EAPs, their employee assistance programs, is that there is a lot of services and resources that we may not even think to look for because we're in crisis mode. And so there are a number of employers who do have within their employee assistance or their benefits program some top ups as well as some financial assistance. We actually just did a conversation with it's tax season. So it was a good friend of mine who actually does our business taxes, who we went through all of the different tax things that we're leaving on the table here in Canada as well. So there's a number of credits. There's a number of credits that you can get for retrofitting your home as well that offset some of those costs, very costly of setting up. So there's some services and resources there you could get. Always talk during tax season with your advisor or your tax specialist because they can help you navigate. I'm not a tax expert, but they can always help you to navigate to some of those additional resources. And here in Canada, we have a lot of different things that we often forget about. Canada 211 is completely free. It can help you navigate to services and resources to offset a lot of those financial burdens that you have as well. So look
Is
into
that across Canada, this
that is,
211?
yeah, Canada 211's across Canada. Provincially, we each province has their own non-for-profit and service. So here in Ontario, where I am, we have the Ontario Caregiver Collective and Coalition. That there is a free number that you can call within the hours of 9 to 5. They're licensed care planners, so they can kind of help to navigate and help you offset some of those costs. Your accountant, which you're working with anyways during tax season, they'll know these different codes and deductibles. And then through workplaces, a lot of people forget that their resource and support and their insurances will help to cover some costs as well. It's just asking. And some great workplaces even do offset some of the costs for elder care and backup care in the workplace. Um, I know a couple, which I won't name currently, but they do have quite a significant top up, a couple of $1,000s to have backup care. You do have your Ontario or your regional or your provincial health at home, which will give you certain amount of support in the home. But then for the top ups, there's often some funds and top ups through your workplace as well that we often forget about that offsets a little bit of the financial cost.
What about from a time perspective? Because obviously, economic is one thing, but also time, right? So if this person wants to care for their loved one, they want to be there at times, but they can't, or there's an appointment they have to go to and support, but maybe they can't get the time off, or it's hard to get the time off, or the boss gaslights them, or one of these sort of things. What about that perspective?
I know, and then this is something that we'll probably go into a lot. So I spent 20 years in people and culture. My big thing is about equity in the workplace. And some of the things that I really do not agree with is the return to work, which really disrupted the availability or the ability for caregivers to have flexibility to be with their loved ones, to take them to appointments during the day, which are 9 to 5 while you're working. So for that, I would y- for that we can, that's a different topic, the encouragement and what to do in workplaces and what to advocate for in a workplace. From a time perspective, there still are some resources. Again, here in Ontario, there's transportation services that are often offset by your provincial and federal government. um, I can't quite remember. I'll remember some of the transportation services that help you get the loved one to and fro. Advocating for yourself in the workplace and asking for flexibility. employers are mandated that you do have to allocate flexibility in the workplace for someone who does have someone they're supporting. I know this one's a really difficult one. I'm not going to pretend to say I have all of the answers. It's advocating in the workplace for time for yourself. There are services and resources like the transportation that can at least help to take your family member to an appointment. But yeah, this one's it's definitely a tricky one. It's difficult to try to navigate your career in care, which is what we try to do too.
So how would you consider advocating? Like, what would that look like in that circumstance? Obviously, being on the other end of the table, you've probably experienced it. So
Yeah.
how would you recommend this person, whatever their job is? I don't know whether it's entry level or management, whatever it is. How would you suggest that they navigate this um, request almost?
People are often afraid to tell their employer that they have responsibilities or they have these they have caregiving responsibilities at home. And often on the employer side and the work that we're doing, the employers don't actually even know how many people are caregiving. There's a bias and then there's a fear for people wanting to say, I need time off and I have caregiving responsibilities because from myself being a woman in the workplace or just someone who's had caregiving responsibilities and trying to navigate that, we're afraid that if we raise our hand and say, listen, I'm having challenges, I have somebody at home that I need to and have responsibilities for, that we're somehow going to look like we can't get our job done. So the first thing is we've got to start advocating for ourselves and basically not hiding the fact that we're caregivers and that we have these responsibilities, because often on the other side and being on the other side, we didn't even know. We spent a lot of time educating employers that up to 40% and more, because of our aging population, are providing some form of care while working. Employers in the last couple of years didn't even know that. So they couldn't even tell you how many people were providing care. So it's the start of having the conversation and not being afraid to ask for what you need. Here in Canada, there are protections around your job as well. So very different from the US. Legally, they have to accommodate. So putting on my HR hat again, advocating for yourself and saying, I need this flexibility and I have somebody that I'm responsible for. I need this time or I need this flexibility. From
Is that a
a
provincial or a federal law?
That's federal. That's federal. So from it's they cannot discriminate based on caregiving responsibilities. So I
What's
think
that mean
people,
in practice, Cindy? Like in practice, what does that mean? Like,
yeah.
where is the line of what is reasonably accommodating versus where they'll push back?
So a reasonable accommodation obviously is something that. So that's a good question. They can't if you I know this is a funny one, because I'm putting back on my HR hat where I'm like, ooh, where do I want to get employers in trouble? And where do I want to advocate for caregivers? And so I'm going to advocate for caregivers. They can't, I mean, the long and short of it, they can't fire you because you have responsibilities at home. I have never in my 20 years of work ever seen somebody who genuinely has responsibilities at home ever have taken advantage of that. And so asking for flexibility in the workplace, they have to accommodate for that. And so if that's the push and pull right now, where it's the return to work and they are trying to get you in for 5 days a week, you have the right to advocate for yourself and say, I cannot do this because I have responsibilities. I have somebody who's aging. I have, an aging parent. I have my husband has chronic kidney illness. And so they have to accommodate to that. Um, And I would say from the what's unreasonable, I really don't think people are taking advantage of that. Is that kind of like what you're asking, or like where are you probing? What are you trying? I'm curious to go deeper into this one.
I'm just trying to see, like, if they say I need to work 20 hours, outside the 9 to 5, is that considered reasonable or unreasonable? What about if I want to work from home 4 days a week and in the office 1 day a week and they're in the office 5 days? Is that reasonable? What about if you're a sales guy and you want to, or you need to, um, do it virtually rather than in person? What about, I don't know, these sort of circumstances, right? Because I understand and recognize every circumstance is unique, but there has to be I know I engineer. I like black and white, but black and white is not truly what this is. It's gray. So try and understand, where is it really gray and where is it a little less gray. Really, I'm trying to understand and uh, make this more binary than analog.
Yeah, and I understand too. And so there isn't a black and white where it's like this is where we have to draw the line. It's case by case. And so there is the reasonable accommodation and the duty to accommodate within an employer and through HR. And so that essentially means that I have a responsibility as an employer to find a middle ground within reason. So, yes, there is going to be situations, unfortunately, and the truth of it, that within reason, if you are a salesperson and that job originally required you to do a certain thing, or you have to be at this certain organization, or your job function, the requirement is that you have to be in person selling, then there still is a duty of accommodation. But if that is so unfortunately it is an HR employer thing. A good employer who's going to do the right thing will work with you on it. They do have to find that duty of accommodation and finding somewhere in the middle where they can work with you on flexibility. But if you look at it from the employer side, you do have to look at that original job function as well, and what was part of that mandate of the job function, the job description, and what is the requirement of the role, and the duty to accommodate above and beyond of what they can do. So if it is, of course, a salesperson that's required to be 100% for whatever reason at client sites, and that was written in the job description, and the right employer will find a middle ground and support you because that's just the right thing to do. But that is unfortunately the gray law around it, that there technically is that ceiling where it's like, okay, well, this was the job description and now you don't fit that job description.
And so, would you be better, in your advice, for this caregiver to go directly and talk those accommodations with a supervisor or manager, or would this be a better conversation to direct to HR because they might have a more appropriate lens to understand, let's say?
I think it depends on the relationship that you have with your direct manager. So oftentimes, if you have a really great manager, they're the first point of contact and their first point of people to advocate for you as an employee. I've had those situations when my father was sick. I was working in a very large Canadian corporate company, and I had a great boss, and so I could talk to that person about, I need this flexibility. Here's what I'm going through, and where can we have the gray zone? So the gray zone there was when my father had passed away. The letter of HR is, we've got 5 days of bereavement, which I think is ridiculous for people, especially grieving people. Um, that was the letter of HR, and so that was kind of written. However, I had a great relationship with that particular manager, and they're just like, "Come back when you need to. Things will be here. We'll figure it out within reason." It's not like I took a year off and that company was still paying for me, but there was a flexibility. So it really depends on what relationship do you have with your line manager or your direct management. Um, if not, then yes, of course, going to your HR, understanding the policies and the processes. You can also reach out to, again, your employee resource program. So there's numbers there that you can reach out confidentially to them. You state the employer that you work with and then ask for the options that you have through that workplace as well. Get all the facts. So it really just depends on the relationships that you have in the workplace. And then if you really are still really weary about it for whatever reason, you do have access to your EAP through the workplace that will help you navigate what your leaves look like, what the flexibility could look like in the workplace, and those things as well.
Does it change if you're part-time versus full-time? Because part-time doesn't have the benefits in these sort of assistance programs.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're often advocating for at when we're on organizations for caregivers, is there is quite a difference between what full-time employees do have and either freelance part-time employees, they don't usually have access to these, the total rewards, the benefits. And so there is a little bit of more of the advocacy and trying to negotiate. That is something that I think we're all in provinces trying to advocate for, is changes in how caregivers are supported in workplaces, because this is one of the ones that unfortunately people who are in freelance, who are precarious work, who are in contracts, don't often have access to those benefits that the full-time employees do too, unfortunately.
What is the qualification or criteria to determine if someone meets the criteria of needing these accommodations to care? So if this is in this case it's this person's mother, but let's say it's the mother-in-law, let's say it's the aunt, maybe your neighbor that you support because the family's not around. Like, where, or is there a line for what is reasonable in the duty to care?
Yeah, so this is another thing that we're all working to change within our human rights codes. So there is unfortunately still a little bit of a black and white on who qualifies as a dependent in workplaces. There was changes to that. Oh my goodness. Apparently it was 20 years ago. So we're working in Ontario.
Nice and fresh, right?
I know, that's ridiculous. So, um, 20 years ago, it was really just like your dependents, your spouse and your children. Of course, we all know that we have chosen families and we have and we have friends and we have, so the letter of the law where it has changed currently and dependent is somebody who is dependent on you. Um, is still a spouse or a child. So there is a lot of like gray area, unfortunately, with an adult child. um, there can be now anybody who you are responsible, but then it really unfortunately still stops there. So this is a lot of the work and the advocacy that we're doing to broaden the understanding of who qualifies as somebody that you're responsible for. Um, Adult parents is a gray area, unfortunately, still right now. And so a lot of the work to be done in human rights and the human rights codes, and especially from the working classifications of who you're responsible for or who that is a dependent on you, is being changed. But right now, yes, it is uh, black and white. It's, a spouse, a child that's dependent on you. Um, there's some gray area around parents now, obviously, with our aging population, but that is being worked and revised because it hasn't been for 20 years.
And that's in 20 years, you're referring, it's a provincial policy, I would assume.
Yes, and so I am trained through the Ontario, like my HRPA is Ontario, my HR certification. So I'm a little rusty on all the other provinces, but here, yeah, it is definitely an Ontario thing. I would assume though it's a federal as well. Like it's pretty standard across, I would think.
Yeah. Well, Cindy, let's introduce you to the audience. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So Cindy Diogo is the CEO and co-founder of ConSoul, a Toronto-based B2B AI platform that helps employers support the millions of employees navigating complex caregiving situations. Drawing on 20 years of HR and people and culture leadership and her own experience as a family caregiver, Cindy founded ConSoul to fill a critical gap in the employee benefits landscape. ConSoul's AI platform, Celeste, connects caregivers to navigation, resources, and backup support, reducing absenteeism, burnout, and healthcare costs for employers. Cindy also sits on the Ontario Caregiver Coalition Board and is a Forbes contributor. Amazing. So I think you're the first HR person we've had on the show, Cindy. So as you can probably tell, that's an area we haven't dove into a lot so far. So welcome.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and I have to say, probably a little bit rusty on my HR these days from trying to do something else, but it sticks with you, I think.
That's the thing. So Cindy, can you talk to us about your early life origin story? That's how we usually start. So was there anything in that growing up dynamic that really said, I'm going to create a caregiver support organization, you know, years later? Like, can you talk about what that was like growing up and how it led to where you are
Yeah.
now?
It's really funny because I've never really taken a step back to think about like how did I get here? And I always thought I got here and what we're doing now because of what we recently had gone through as caregivers. But I started to think about like my childhood and growing up and I was like, "Oh, I've always been around older adults." And so my mother is she's retired now but was a nurse. Had spent her whole career since the age of 18 in long-term and retirement facilities and where I grew up in a small town. And every so Immigrant family, uh, mother, father constantly working. There were times where I'd be in the like I was just like, why didn't I think of this? I'd be in the long-term care facility with my mom. And then fast forward in high school, all of my co-ops were in that retirement home too. I'm an only child and I grew up with like older adults. Like the funny thing is I'm better with people who are older than me. I have a small circle of people my age. So I think I get along and I just resonate with older adults. And it kind of dawned on me that I've always been around caregiving my whole life. And
Where were your parents from? Where did they
Brad
immigrate from?
so here in Ontario in Bradford, so it's like the near Barrie area, but Bradford, like 30 years ago, was like a small, small town. Bradford actually started, funny enough, this is probably going to date me too. Our retirement community and long-term care facility was a convent when it started. So that's like how it was. And it was also very creepy. We thought it was like haunted. And those are different stories for other times.
And
Um,
where do your parents come from? What country?
my mama actually was born in Africa in Mozambique, and then my father's from Portugal, so Portuguese. So they immigrated here. My mom when she was 13, dad similar, but typical immigrant story, right? We come here, we didn't have anything, we started from scratch. Start in 18 and where you're working. So that kind of like I don't know why I remembered that, but I'm like, oh, I've always been around and advocating and listening to the stories of older adults, and this was just like my life. So that was kind of the origin story. And then fast forward, I spent, like I said, 20 years or so in people and culture and recruitment at other people's companies and software companies and very large enterprises. And the thing that I really always loved in workplaces was making sure that they were equitable and they were fair for people, especially women. So one of the things that I was always passionate about is benefits, which is doesn't sound very cool, but making sure that we have the right benefits in place, that we're supporting people, that if they, we're just compassionate, equitable people. And then fast forward, then I've been a caregiver multiple times over. So dad, unfortunately, that experience of trying to navigate my job and dad unfortunately was terminally ill. Stephanie's my co-founder, and my sister-in-law. So we lost her husband, 35-year-old, to colon cancer during the pandemic. My husband has chronic kidney failure. My grandma has advanced dementia. So I think it's always been something that I just I've always been around care, and I've always been around people who are supporting care and then people who need care.
Did you think at any point that you would end up down this road having a caregiving company or caregiving support company?
No, not at all. Um, when I love tech and I love software, so I thought I was going to be in like I guess I kind of am still. Um, but I think it's one of those things where when something so dramatic and awful happens to you, and so like truly, like I'm not mincing words, heartbreaking. Like it was a very difficult last couple of years, and watching people get very sick. Um, and realizing that it's so very hard to navigate to the things that you need as a family that I just felt like I can't think of doing anything else. And so it's one of those things where you're so pulled to it. I'm sure you have very similar experiences of your why. Like you're so pulled to it that I don't think I could imagine myself doing anything else. And I hope this all works out because this has been, I think the joke between my family is we were really doing well when I was 20 years into a career. But I've been the happiest and most fulfilled doing this, being a poor startup founder right now than the 20 years. I've enjoyed it, but I think I'm really pulled to this.
What would you say your why is if you had to sum it up in two sentences?
My why is because people shouldn't feel grief alone. I think that was what I realized. It's lonely being grieving and not having or feeling like you have a community or support.
Do you think being an only child and being brought to your parents' professions and while they were working and seeing the grind that they were doing to try and provide for you, do you think there's any function in that where you maybe didn't think about it, but console was a way that you're like, I wish my parents had this, they'd get the sports that they needed? Was there any function of that in there?
I really love you ask really good questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should be like a psychologist. Like you're like digging real deep.
That's my sister's job, not mine.
Oh, okay. So
I'm the math guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
you learned some stuff there because that's like some serious cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like, tell me about. um, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my mom. So one of my whys is obviously my dad. My dad was my origin story, and like my dad and father died. He was my superhero. Like we watched, Fox Sunday movies together, um, and so he was my person, and I lost my person. But then, thinking back, my mom has been a caregiver on both sides, and it's often the caregiver that doesn't get the recognition, which is so awful because again, I started this whole thing because my father died without even realizing that my mother's been a caregiver both to other people and to other people's family and has been a caregiver to her family. So, taking care of dad and supporting him during his, when he was passing away. And now with my grandmother, her mother with very advanced vascular dementia, she's right back in the retirement home that she worked at because my grandma's in there and she's supporting grandma. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think very much. The whole reason is watching, how hard they worked and my mother, how hard she worked supporting other people, how hard she worked being a caregiver herself without that, recognition. I think very much is part of the story of the why. And I don't think caregivers get enough support, recognition, and respect that they really do deserve.
We've talked about on the show before the idea of like double duty caregivers, the people like your mother who uh they work full time in nursing, some sort of care capacity, and then they go home and they're caring as well there, and that takes a significant burden. And we're seeing that prevalence increasing. Um, can you talk about that dynamic and um, the unique perspective that HR would have with respect to navigating those individuals?
It's a whole other really interesting dynamic that we haven't even started to really dig into. So, dual caregiving is so huge. Um, from my colleagues within the industry who may be at a retirement community or working HR in a hospital, the amount, so you already have burnt out caregivers who are working, so providing support in the hospitals who are understaffed and um, underappreciated, really. And then they go home and they're supporting others. So um, it's such an interesting dynamic from a HR perspective. I know that there is a challenge in conversation and how do we support our nurses and how do we support our staff because they're already understaffed and very overwhelmed and burnt out and mental health in workplaces just generally is a crisis and issue. And then you've got nurses. So I don't even know where to or how to start that topic and where to even start solving that. But there is such a deep conversation and how do we support those dual caregivers and how do we provide them with the mental health support and with supports in the workplace. There's a whole bunch of different things popping up and how do we reward the nurses in these retirement homes and how do we support them and what are the tools that they need. um, I'm not an expert in that one. Mine is, working caregivers that are in workplaces, but it's such an interesting topic that I think we're all starting to explore as well. Do you, from your experiences, like what are you thinking and what are you seeing in this topic?
I am seeing that they are undersupported, overworked. They come home and then they have to take on the grind. But what's interesting is you had the contribution quotes in Forbes last month or a couple months back, and it was really interesting. And just connecting to this, this conversation, double duty caregivers. What you said in this article on Forbes was a significant share of our platform engagement happens between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. These
Mhm.
women are not stepping away from their careers. They're trying desperately to hold both at once. So I think there's an interesting piece there. Whether you may know on the back end of the algorithm, whether they are double duty caregivers or not, I have no idea. But nonetheless, you have these people that are supposed to be in work, doing their job, employment, putting the employer first. But their mind obviously is not totally in it. Their mind is in this other place. Like, what do I need to do to navigate whatever my care needs are, or the care needs my loved one are. So it's kind of this awkward tension of the employer wants you to be entirely dedicated to them, put the focus on them from 8 till 5, the focus is on them. But in reality, the constraint that they're putting in to say you have to dedicate this time to us is actually causing them to drift more than say, you know what, take an hour a day and do what you need to do. When in reality, that probably dedicate them more. I think about this on the analogy, similar to what Google or Apple or one of these tech companies in Silicon Valley have, where they don't force you to work X amount of hours a week, right? They've got sleep pods, they got lunch, they got catered lunch, they got daycare, they got. Google's got a Quidditch pitch in the back. They got all these things because the objective is when you're there, you are there and present. So your quote specifically makes me kind of think and wrestle with that. The idea that if we were more adaptable, nimble, and supportive, then maybe when they're there, they will be more present and engaged.
1,000%. And so I talk and I think about redesigning workplaces. And one of the frustrations, and I'm just going to say it because I'm not an employer anymore, I think it was really devastating and stupid to force people back into offices 4 or 5 days a week. Um, I mean, you don't even want to, I don't even need, I mean, I could go down the gendered lens. We know that there's a good portion of people that are women who provide care. And what did that do? That really disrupted the flexibility that women had that gave them that ability to just be slightly a little less stressed out about having to try to do all the things and have all the things organized. And so then we pushed everybody back into the workplace with the flexibility that we um, did not disprove that it was, causing issues in productivity. On the contrary, there's lots of data out there and there's lots of studies that prove that productivity didn't decrease because you were home. This is purely a power play thing, and probably we have lots of offices that we need to put bums back in seats and things. But from a design perspective, and where I would love to see the future of work is asynchronous. So this idea of this 9 to 5, as we proved, and there is data in our platform that is showing that just because you've pulled them into the workplace, they're searching things. And it's productivity. It's about 15 hours a week that people are during work days searching for things that they need and resources, and their mind's not there. So why not give them flexibility? And then also, why not think about asynchronous work? Like, why do I have to be sitting there from 9 to 5? If most of the things that I'm responsible for may be project based or maybe outcome based. So as a mother, somebody's providing care. Let me put my kid to bed and then do the last couple of hours or whatnot. So a lot of places are starting to think about that. I know it's still a little bit progressive, but that's what the data showed. I mean, I could tell you what people are searching when they're searching from 9 to 5. And then they're like, oh, here's this number that you can call. No one's calling that number at work. They're calling them in the evening. And then those numbers that you're offering people are 9 to 5 as well. So then they can't reach somebody who's going to support them because they need it after hours. And then, those hotlines or whatever they are, they're not available either. Lots of interesting data that we learned from having caregivers use the platform, what they're utilizing. But yeah, I'm going to go down a big rabbit hole if I don't stop talking about workplace redesign. But
So, can you talk about your platform and what it was initially conceptualized as? Obviously, things change and adapt as time goes on, and we build these things. But initially, when you were building it, what was the objective of it?
yeah, absolutely. We
And
sub
talk about what it is as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. So 4 years ago, Stephanie and I were like, "This is there's no thing that is trying to support the overall just wellness of the caregiver." And so that's always our thing. It's like, I don't need more stuff. I don't need more tools. I just need something that's going to help me alleviate a little bit of the burden that's on me as that primary caregiver. And so, really, what we wanted it to be was just a place where for some reason or somehow something could get the things that the caregiver needed, either offload things, take it off of their plates. And so it really started as just a hub where, and this is not novel now, 4 years later, but where you could add your family and friends, where we could make the recommendations on how they could help you, because often, I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times. People always ask us, well, how can I help? And then that's putting the burden on the caregiver. And then the caregiver just ends up doing the thing themselves because it's stressful to have to tell other people how to help you. So we were like, well, what if we could make something that in some way, and we didn't have the language for it and the technology back then to be able to say, what if we had an assistant for the caregiver who just knew caregiving and could make a suggestion and recommendations to family and friends on how to support that caregiver without burdening the caregiver on having to tell you how to do the thing? So it really started off as that. And the big thing for us was, we're not a mental health app, but how can we really reduce a little bit of the stress on a caregiver? And the long and short of it is, yeah, we're calling it cognitive load, but it really is just the overwhelm and the sense of, I can't do this myself. So that's where it started, really 4 years ago. Fast forward, I love tech. I think there's ways in which tech is not, the bad guy all the time. It's not, I think there's ways in which we can use tech for good. And I think the way that we're using it, and you mentioned it, is not a chatbot, an agent that we now have the technology to be able to try to offload things off of caregivers' plates. And that's where I think the coolness or the interesting concept of how do we use technology for positive things as opposed to, Skynet and taking everyone's jobs and all that.
How does the agent work?
hmm So, the agent itself, and now fast forward, you do have agentive technologies. So, again, I won't go with this, is not the purpose of it, but we started off with Gen AI, which is chatbots, which it it's essentially, the caregiving family who's waiting for you to tell it what you need. So we had that, and you would prompt it and you would be essentially communicating with it but telling it what you would need, and then it, fetches the results. Whereas where we have it now, and it's still very early on, but agent is really, and we call it Celeste, and I create a gender for it because Celeste is my grandmother's name. So I will say she. Obviously, technology is not he or she, but she remembers and continues to remember. So has this persistent memory of that individual person or caregiver, their
Tied
situation.
to cookies or something in the back end?
Yeah, but also the way that we've designed it in the back end well, we use a specific tool, and we've been training for the last year through our partnerships. We've worked with Baycrest, we've worked with the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. So it's definitely not a generalized AI. It has been trained on context of caregiving, on things like respite, on navigating provincial and federal supports, simplifying things for caregivers. So it's been trained in the last year on the context of caregiving. And then also it continues to learn that specific caregiver's journey, who they're caring for, and then make recommendations. So as opposed to waiting for that caregiver, Celeste will say something like, I've noticed you've been on here talking to me since 2 a.m. or whatnot, whatever it is. May I suggest this service? Here are some respite that I think you could need. We integrate where an employer is interested with their benefits. And so what we can do is help to surface all of the different benefits and support that you may already have in the workplace, and then start to look broadly what community support is out there in your location. How do I navigate to that? How do I navigate to respite? So really just doubling down on I mean, I'd love for it to get to the point where this is the caregiver's co-pilot or the care personal assistant. But that's the difference there. It's learning, it's understanding the context of the caregiver, and it's really doubling down on it knows that individual person and their situation to double down on the resources, the services, and then the support that that particular caregiver needs.
What is the validation process to ensure that it's not hallucinating nonsense? It is, truly understanding what is needed of this person, um, understanding what supports are truly relevant in the domain that you live in, say in Alberta here, Ontario there. Um, yeah, what goes into that validation process for the recommendations, but also what goes into the validation process that the Consul has when they accept organizations or supports or programs into their tool in general, like BlueBell Village and the BlueBell Connect tool and the Dementia Collective, we're all in the console platform. So, like, firstly, what validations exist in the AI generated recommendation support piece? But two, what validations do you guys have at Console to ensure that the supports that are coming in to caregivers themselves are reasonable, appropriate, safe?
Yeah, absolutely. So validation on the platform itself. So there's human in the loop, obviously. So the way that we've designed it is always checking on guardrails privacy. We are so I'll go into the privacy and security thing first. So the guardrails and validation. We obtained this year a certification that we actually brought in from Europe through the Mental Health Commission of Canada, which is the ORCA certification. So in Europe, you have a bit of, I wouldn't say higher standards of security and compliance, just a bit more of the deeper guardrails around, what your privacy, security, compliance guardrails, and then overall security around who you're delivering things to. So we brought that in and we obtained that certification because, of course, um, you're dealing with humans that are in precarious seasons of their life, and so the last thing you want to do is give them something that's giving them inaccurate information, hallucinating. We could go down the rabbit hole of all of those different stories of unfortunately teenagers in the U.S. getting really bad advice, and so that's always been very critical to me, including obviously DEIB, which I know in the US is also a funny thing, but equity, diversity, lived experience was very important to me. So everything that was
What's the
built,
last D? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and
belonging and belonging. So making sure that you think about things like neurodiversity in workplaces. So this is one of the programs before I started Consul that I was building into workplaces is making sure that if people are neurodivergent, think a different way, that's really the belonging. Psychological safety is part of the belonging as well. So making sure that people feel comfortable enough to bring their whole selves to work. That's a HR thing. I'm going down a tangent, but we built those guardrails in and then we received those certifications. So and then our back end is enterprise grade at Azure and all that good stuff. Again, that's HR. So that is the validation. There's a human in the loop as well. The difference here between why our thing doesn't hallucinate is because we are not attached to the broader World Wide Web search. And so what that means is your chats and your AI agents currently now will go and your Claudes and your chat GPTs will go and search content in the internet. Ours is a closed AI, which means that ours isn't going out. It's been completely trained Canada first, so federal, provincial for the last year, and what is validated, what is compliant. And you talked a lot about how do you get into the app, and we'll talk about that second question. So everything there has been validated, is accredited, and is federal, provincial, or a service that is vetted for the caregiver. So you won't get a hallucination. You might get her overwhelmed sometimes because they're not perfect, but it won't offer solutions that are inaccurate because it's a contained training that we've been doing with her for the year. I keep saying it for the last year. How do we ensure that all of the services and the programs and the recommendations that we have in the app, similar process. So we do not recommend any home So, example, anything that has a certification that we've had conversations with, that we have validated is a reputable service. If it is something where they are going into a home, for example, we do, of course, start with the recommendations of the provincially or federally funded programs. So, respite in the home. The second layer for us in the process to then have a vetted tool in the work and in our app, I'm thinking about HR again, is a couple of checks and balances for us too. So if it is a private home care organization, we do ask for their certifications, their insurances, their background checks to get into the app as well. So we are going through those checks and balances too, and we're not just putting any services that don't meet that requirement. Because of course, if you're coming into someone's home or you're recommending something, there are a lot of services out there who don't have those certifications, background checks, and insurances. We won't partner with them and put them into the platform.
How many services are on Consul?
Oh my goodness! As of now, we probably have over 300. So we've been very selective on who's been in the platform again because we don't want to be recommending things that we don't know that are providing value and really just are doing the right thing.
What level of data do you guys have for the person that we're caring for? So going back to our Patreon villager earlier on, talking about caring for the mother that has dementia. Do does the caregiver when they create their profile have to kind of give the context of who they are caring for? So that in case this woman would put the details of her mother so that then it gives the right care for that mother, or is it reflective of the user themselves?
So everything is encrypted and anonymized. So we don't have access to this specific caregiver. So I can't, and of course that's for privacy. Um, they have the option of just a quick start onboarding. So they don't have to tell us any of that. They don't have to add a care circle if they don't want to. And they can just
What's a
start.
care circle?
Care Circle is adding family and friends. And so the benefit of that is if you do have family and friends and they want to help, and like we talked about, they often want to help and then put the onus on the caregiver to tell them how to help. What we're doing is if you add your family and friends or people who want to help you, we send SMS texts to make recommendations on things we know that they can help with. So that I'll give you an example. So when Michael, my husband, went into kidney failure over the summer, I used my app again. And to keep everybody up to date, because often people are overwhelming that primary caregiver. You're getting text messages, you're getting calls. Some of my friends, for whatever reason, were communicating with me on Instagram on how Michael was doing, and so and WhatsApp. So I just shuffled everybody into the platform to be able to keep everybody up to date in one place. But it also sends recommendations and just texts. Hey, Cindy's been in the hospital. You may want to look into this grocery. They know I have a dog. Maybe you want to walk Jack because she's been in the hospital all day. So that's the care circle. It's really just adding your family and friends so we can double down on helping the primary caregiver get a little bit of respite.
So if we were to look at this villager again, they're caring for their mother with dementia. What sort of
The data that
does it filter specifically and say, hey, these are the dementia specific supports that are relevant for this person?
yes.
Or does it take a step back and say, you're a caregiver, here are the supports you need?
So it can do it two ways. So if you do onboard and you want to tell us who specifically that you're providing care for, and again, we don't need to get into specific diagnosis. We don't have medical records in there for whatever reason. We don't integrate with that. And that was by design. But at the very minimum, if you tell us when you're onboarding who you're taking care of, at what stage. So we do collect a minimum enough to personalize the experience for that caregiver. We're 3 years into it. So of course, because we're training the models, we don't niche down, 5, 7 layers, but the layer that we do niche down to is if you are telling us that you provide care for someone with dementia, we'll niche down and like my grandmother again has advanced vascular dementia. It's different than other forms of dementia. We can niche down, and then when you do land on the homepage, then it's personalized a little bit further than just if you quick started and here are some services, resources, and guidance that we generally recommend.
In that Forbes article I referenced earlier, you also mentioned the fact that $7,200 or $7,200 is annually spent out of pocket on caregiving related expenses. What does that mean in practice? How is that money being spent? Where is it being allocated? How did you come up with this number?
Yeah. So with that data, that is being calculated. So there's some standardized information that's been put out both from the Canadian and the US market. That is also generally pulled in from some data that we have from the platform as well, and how people are utilizing and generally um, acquiring services. Things can be aging in place is a big, and there's lots of really interesting data points that we have now from people using it. Aging in place is very similar to what everyone's talking about now. It's a big thing. People do want to age in place if they can. And so a lot of those services are things like thinking about retrofitting. That could be literally putting in grab bars into the bathrooms, retrofitting your bathroom with things. So those are out of pocket expenses, sometimes transportation to and fro appointments if you're working and can't get mom or dad or whomever to an appointment. So those specific sometimes, and so these numbers are already starting to increase for us. That could be also you do have home care that's covered, but sometimes you may want to top up, and so those private home care also starts to cost. The extra hour here and there, generally a couple. Anywhere from 100 to $55 an hour. So those are generally out of pocket that caregivers are incurring for additional things that they're using out of pocket for.
When you think about a caregiver of someone living with dementia, are there any specific needs that you think are um, underaddressed versus caregiving as a general bucket that we need to address? So let's say an employer is supporting or employer has an employee that is caring for someone living with dementia. Is there any particular information or knowledge that they should have to help them care more appropriately for this employee?
That's a really great question. What information should they have to care for that employee?
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
flip this around.
Okay.
So if you were supporting a organization or talking to an organization, a team of HR executives, whatever, in a company, and you were asked to tell them what they need to know about supporting caregivers of people living with dementia, what would that be?
Mm, that's a good one. What would I tell them? Well, I think it starts off with what we talked about is the bias. So there's still a bias that, you're their child. They don't necessarily need your support. And so I think there's a bias around that. We're still not very good at talking about dementia in workplace as well, and what that means for your employees. So I think the awareness is the number one thing that unfortunately the employer needs to know, that it is on the rise and that we do have an aging population, and a lot more that your employers are going to be requiring to provide support. Um, like I mentioned, aging in place is something, well, by design, but also because, and you know this better than I do. You're the expert here. Our homes, our retirement homes, our long term care facilities are understaffed, and also what is it, 98 or 98% of the beds are already, like, we're already at capacity, if not already at capacity. I think.
In Edmonton, 90% of folks living with dementia live at home because the capacity is such a mess.
And so what is our wait? I think ours is 5 to 7 years for a bed here. Is it similar to you?
I don't know the exact
Yeah.
number, how long it is, but publicly funded, I think, is about a year.
Yeah.
But again, not all those places they necessarily want to put their families, not because they're not necessarily nice people, but they're underfunded, overworked, oversupported. You typically see increase in um, drug consumption, like prescription drug consumption, depression, just because they're forcing their hand sometimes. Like we have to do these things, we have to keep moving around. We had James Lee on the show earlier, and he was talking about what if we shifted the paradigm of care to be about less about efficiency, more about quality of care. And I think that's so important that we don't do often. That's not how we evaluate it. We evaluate on economic models.
Oh, yeah, efficiencies. I think the thing is with the employer, it's first of the awareness and then how to the support and just teaching them on what is the process and how long it takes. And here in Ontario, I think it is a 5 to 7 wait for certain homes and certain facilities. And so the reality is that we will have a very large demographic of our pretty much most tenured employees who are providing some form of care for an aging adult and aging in place. And so I think that's one thing that I would definitely encourage and start to educate employers about. How do you even support an employee who has an elder family member who has to age in place? What does that look like? What are the supports? What can you access, which is still quite difficult because we are understaffed and there's not a lot of resources. So I think teaching them that and then teaching them the awareness that there's just going to have to be a shift in workplaces because we don't have enough professionals to be providing support. So who's going to take care? It's your employees. And what are you going to do? You're going to lose all of these people. It's just not possible. So I think it's the education on where do they turn to, who are the supports, how do you help them to help that person age in place, how do you top up potentially different benefits. So there's benefits on maternity and paternity top ups and there's benefits there. Well, we do have to start talking about the other end, which is programs and support and financial stipends in the workplace to be able to say, okay, well, you have $5,700 this year for backup PSW for your parents, or this amount for making sure that the home is retrofitted for an aging adult as well.
We have multiple policymakers I know that watch this, both in Canada and the United States. I've talked to some of them separately off the show, but we have multiple that watch. What would you tell them as a recommendation, knowing that they can help change the trajectory of the policy on the back end that's leading to these decisions, whether that's business regulatory policies, whether that is healthcare policies? What would you have to say to these policymakers?
For me, and where we really advocate for is workplace design and change. And so so the first thing I would do is my fellow HR people are probably going to hate me because they don't like being told what they need to do in terms of their regulations and policies and what they have to learn. But we really do need to mandate that um, it is black and white about the accommodation for caregivers. And so that has to be a change in our policy that you make it difficult for somebody who's providing care for someone, that this is a federal serious, and you do have to make an accommodation, and that has to be a broader sense of who qualifies for the accommodation depending on who they're caring for. It has to be broader. So we do have to change the way in which we look at who's accommodated for and what the level is. And it's not just, it's things like chosen family, it's friends that you may be caring for that are dependent, and also then regulating employers to be really held to a high standard if they make it difficult for employees who have some form of care to care and work at the same time. So we need to change that policy. Uh, from a I mean, this is coming in from Nova Scotia. I think we just need to start thinking about how the reality is we don't have enough nurses and we don't have enough staff. So who's going to be taking care? It's you and I and family members. I really do think we should start paying family members if they are providing support. Oh, I know that there's a small, I think it's what, $300 in Nova Scotia or so that they're introducing that. It's not
Yeah, I
enough.
don't remember, but I hear it's come up probably 3 or 4 times on the show. People are like,
Yeah.
"That's great. That's what we need to do."
You just need to do that. Like it's ridiculous if you're providing support for someone and you've had to leave your job. Why wouldn't you get paid to be if there's no staff and there's no nursing support? why wouldn't you want a family member who has the best interest of that person to be compensated for providing the care for them? That just has to change, and I'm hopeful that it will change, but that's just a reality. So workplaces, you have to put higher penalties for non-accommodating for someone to be providing care and needing flexibility. Just has to be harder punishments. And from I guess a socioeconomical, the reality is you have to start paying families to provide care too.
Your first point you made there, I think that organizations, HR may be aware of, like, this is what we need to do. This is the expectation. But employees, especially young, early career ones, probably don't think about it. They think if I take this time away, if I step away to care for my loved one, it is going to negatively impact me. I actually haven't told this story on the show yet, but I would have been 20, early 20s, and I just started post secondary my career, and my grandmother was quite sick and she was in the hospital, like on her deathbed, and I said I need to go. I was starting my job. I was there maybe 2 weeks, and I said I need to go be with my grandmother. She is dying right now. I want to be with her. And my boss at the time, not HR, my boss said, "No, you just started here. You need to work." And I go, "No, I am going to go be with my grandmother." They go, "Well, I don't know if you'll have a job." I come back. I said, "Fire me then." And I walked out and they didn't fire me. But that was the conversation of, you know, I was going to be with my grandmother and learning later on, like, that they couldn't have, but that was the justification. Like, it was a push to young employees that were going to be with their loved one that needed that additional care, that the organization and maybe the management wasn't appropriately trained or didn't really care, and they were just trying to push the envelope to see how it was. HR can have this best initiative, but I wonder if there needs to be some education, training, and supports in maybe that post-secondary or even high school. Like, this is what your rights are. Don't be pushed around. Don't be told to do, because I mean, you and I both know, I'm sure, those caregivers that are 18, 16, 25, that are doing this caregiving role, that maybe their feet to the fire. They are stressed. They are nervous. They can't risk losing a job because maybe they're providing for somebody else. So they're navigating this delicate balance. So they're not that sandwich generation, really, but they're still navigating, and there's still so much stigma there that they don't want to risk losing it. And they're relying on what the manager says, and they're not willing to say, screw it. I mean, I lived with my parents, so
Yeah.
fire me, I'll get another job, whatever. My grandmother came first. Deal with it. Right. But that wasn't the case for everyone.
Yeah. And I think that starts with employers and policy changes. And so, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and in our work and advocacy through being on the Ontario Caregiver Coalition, which is really about grassroots. And what I love about it is it really is, and you and I had talked about this, our executive director was a human rights tribunalist. And so, very much is we need to change the law, we need to change policy. And one of the things that we're advocating for in workplaces is the workplace should have the onus of making sure that the managers and the employees are aware of their rights. And one of the ways that we can do that, I always call things cheap and cheerful, because it doesn't, it doesn't require the employer to change a lot of structure or anything, but our occupational health and safety. Like, we have so much training around things that sometimes aren't even relevant anymore in an office working environment, but that we're still trained on when you start a job and have to get the box. One of the recommendations is starting with that, like a section where it's, because we are going to have a good portion, 40%, if not more, because of our aging population, navigating career and care, it's just natural that we put this into the occupational health and safety as a portion of training on how to support working caregivers on both the hiring manager side. So, how do I deal with this and navigate it? Because it's uncomfortable, and hiring managers are usually the ones that are least trained to be flexible, accommodating, and know what to say. So, how do we incorporate this in the policies that we already have to make people aware and to just normalize it? And it just becomes the same way that 10 years ago we didn't have mental health benefits in the workplace, and it was uncomfortable to talk about mental health, and you just didn't. it's these small things that we start to change that eventually I do see caregiving as the next thing that is just table stakes. And it starts with things like changing policies, training, hiring managers. And it doesn't even have to be anything particularly difficult. It's just embedded into the things that you have already.
Have you heard any discussion about a unified front across all the provinces and territories for this? So you're part of the Ontario Caregiver Coalition, but is there discussions being had to say, let's almost unionize all these provincial coalitions together to try and advocate together rather than and recognize health as provincial function, but to say like this is what we expect because whether you live in Lloydminster, that's between Alberta and Saskatchewan, like it shouldn't change between the two. We should have a set and enshrined uh, objectives for care. This is how we should be doing it. This is what we expect. It doesn't matter if you're on the Alberta side or the Saskatchewan side. It should transcend those boundaries.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think this is one of the things, too, that we're often really siloed and we're all doing the same things and we're all trying to accomplish the same thing. But there is a little bit of a silo between a lot of our provincial programs and our non-for-profits and our grassroots that we need to do a better job of coming together as, one ring to rule them all. I do, I,
Love it.
I do believe I use that a lot. I really should stop. Um,
No, don't stop, Lord of the
there,
Rings. Greatest movies ever made. Don't
oh,
stop. Keep going.
best movies. So this is one of the things that I often do struggle with as well. Like we're all in these organizations and non-for-profits, and really at the end of the day, we're all trying to support the same person. I do believe that there is one organization that's come up that is now more of a federal. I think that's the Canadian Center for Caregiving Excellence. I think that is their mandate. But I do think this has to start from a federally led. Um, and it does have to stop being siloed because I think again, occupational health and safety it's not by province to there may be different nuances in industry because of course training someone for working in a manufacturing environment and a blue collar job is a little bit different training, but I agree with you. I think it really does. I don't have the answer for that. I hope that there's conversation and everyone joining forces. I think there is, but I do still think that has to be led through the government as opposed to, these non-for-profits.
Hmm. Are there any practical recommendations you can see for organizations and how they can better support their people?
Yeah. So one of the easiest things to do is most organizations already have their ERGs, employee resource groups. So they're like special interest groups inside of organizations that meet on a whatever cadence, a monthly cadence to talk about their thing. So I was in an organization where we literally had an ERG for everything. We had a pet lovers employee resource group. We had a diversity resource group. We had a women in technology. A lot of organizations, I am starting to see the more progressive ones have a family and caregiver employee resource group. Really cool. Just saw a couple of big Ontario organizations start to stand those up. It's one of the easiest, most practical things to do. Start an employee resource group, get one of your executive leaders to champion it, and then make sure on a monthly basis that you're providing some form of training, learning guidance, sharing resources. Um, because that's the way that people can get together, start to share their stories and share their own resources together. Because it's a lot of the time it's word of mouth. If caregivers are like, "Oh, this program worked great for me," and talk to this organization because they were great in helping mom with her home retrofitting. So I think that's the most practical thing. The next logical step is the training internally, hosting training for your managers on what what do you say, how do you say it, what are the tools, resources and benefits we already have in the workplace so that if you do have someone coming to you and asking for support, you know what to say, you know how to guide them. So I think those are really just kind of the practical, again, the cheap and cheerful things that the employers can do to stand up that don't require a lot of legwork, a lot of work. but add a lot of value to both signaling that you are advocating for caregivers in the workplace so that they can come forward and ask for support, but also training and giving the guidance into the hiring manager or the employer who is the first line of when the caregiver is coming to them asking for support.
One area I think is often under talked about for caregivers, and I hadn't actually thought about this until I was at a startup TNT event a handful of years ago we were speaking at, and it is long distance family caregivers. And there's a woman here in Edmonton, and her name is Samantha Fair, and she has a company called Long Distance Family Services, and she's a former HR person as well. And she created this organization to provide supports to those folks that have, one member of the family is working somewhere else. I think she said in her example, her husband was in Fort Mac. And she created this organization to really support that niche group. And I think, again, similar to what you're saying for caregivers, their caregivers are so different. The dynamics, lived experiences, the family perspectives are so different. And I think so often we've expected this cookie cutter template textbook definition of what the family is. And the families are so blended now and complicated, frankly. So like if we assume that they're all the same way and support them that way, we're missing the mark probably on a lot of them. So we need to, adapt and change. Like, how are we defining, like you said at the beginning of the episode, how are we defining who that caregiver is? How are we defining who that family is? How are we defining the supports that they need? Because the support you may need may be different than the support I need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting work because it does come down to a lot of the work that organizations were starting to think about, prior to the pandemic, which was, again, we mentioned DEIB, diversity, equity, and belonging. And the belonging component was starting to really dissect and understand, okay, how do we make places and workplaces better for people of different experiences and lived experiences, things like, yeah, so including neurodiversity was such a big thing. Psychological safety was a huge thing. So I think a lot of that work, that good work that HR was already starting to do, can translate into how do we support caregivers in the workplace. It's a lot of the work, and the foundation was there of, you do have to recognize different lived experiences and different families. Oh my goodness. Some of the most progressive companies now have pet insurance because they acknowledge that people are pet parents. So
That's expensive.
yeah, it is. But I've seen a lot of organizations. I think the timing is perfect now too, because 3 years ago when we started this work, it was really, you ask yourself, am I on the wrong path? Like, what am I doing? Something crazy? Because it was a lot of education of, why is this important in the workplace? The same way, again, 10 years ago, we didn't talk about our mental health in the workplace, and that wasn't a thing. And it was just a private thing. This is caregiving in the workplace. I found from 3 years from now, from before when we started, is starting to be top of mind, is a conversation. And so I do see a change in the way that employers are, and their willingness and readiness to adopt different solutions. Um, and I think just the acknowledgement that they did get there, and they know that the population's aging too. So
Cindy, it's time for lightning round. All right, coffee or tea?
coffee,
Decaf or calf?
calf.
I'm still the only decaf we've had on here.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. And this is episode 37, I think.
I'm just like,
About that.
why drink something when you're not really drinking something? It's like,
My wife calls it dirty water.
yeah, but it's just like non-alcoholic beer. Like, why are you drinking it then? It's my philosophy.
Early meetings or late meetings?
Early meetings.
Early bird or late owl or late riser?
Neither. I'm like a middle person. I'm not a morning person. I'm like in bed by 8.
You got kids, so that's a little hard to be in bed by 8.
I pass out with the 7-year-old. I'm like, I'm not getting back up. I'm just gonna go to sleep.
What role stretched you more, HR leader or founder?
Founder.
What's one word employers need to hear more when it comes to caregiving?
Equity,
What's one word caregivers need to hear more?
respect.
What's one thing workplaces still get wrong about caregivers?
Oh, and it's only one word.
Or a sentence. You can
Oh,
do a sentence
what's one
or
thing
two
I get
sentences.
wrong? That we're not looking for charity. We're we're looking for fairness,
Flexibility or benefits? Which help caregivers more?
flexibility.
What is harder to fix in the workplace? Silence, stigma, or poorly designed systems?
Poorly designed systems, especially in very large enterprises. It's hard to move those ships.
What is one thing caregivers are better at than most people realize?
Goodness, cognitive load, taking on everything all at once with such grace. You can't get them. I don't know. I would put a caregiver in front of so many different challenges in a heartbeat. Some of the most resilient people I've ever met.
Backup care or better manager support? What is more overlooked?
Ooh, that's a tough one because I'd say both. Oh, I have to pick one? You're
You got to pick
close
one.
to my arm.
Yeah, we're black and white here. Pick one or the other.
Oh, I'm like a gray zone lady. Um, you know what? You just need the thing. So I'd say backup care.
What is one sign an employee is struggling that leaders often miss?
Silence.
Hmm. Why is that?
So there's this saying in HR that you know that your best employee is done where they stop raising their hand and stop contributing because they've given up. So I think it's silence when you start getting some of your best employees that have gone quiet or aren't contributing. That's a sign.
Hmm. What is something people overcomplicate about supporting caregivers at work?
Oh my goodness, flexibility is such a simple concept. I think we've overcomplicated it with this like fight against return to work and mandates. Flexibility is the answer. It's such a simple thing and a simple concept, and we've really complicated it.
This question could be longer than a couple sentences, but what gives you hope right now?
Okay, I'm going to answer it. I'm going to answer it the right way, or I'm going to answer it the way that I know I should. My family gives me hope, and the fact that my husband got cleared to have a kidney transplant this year. I'm sorry, I always get emotional. It's such a so what gives me hope is that we were in a really bad place, and this year we got the A-OK that we can think about a kidney transplant this year and hopefully get back to normal. So that gives me hope, and my family gives me hope. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, that's mine.
Amazing. What's the most human thing that's happened to you lately?
The most human thing that's happened to me. I think the most humanizing thing is being back in caregiving again, a care partner because my husband is not requiring full time caregiving. I'm obviously care partner, but being back in that and being back in hospitals and um, just being around the nurses who were so supportive and yeah, I think that kind of brought me back down to our whole why again. I'm right back in caregiving again.
It's just when you're out, you think it kind of brings you back in because
Mhm.
I mean, we don't have to do it, but we choose to do it because we love that person and we want to support them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I said to my husband that if I end up being the one who gives him the kidney, he can never divorce me, or else I'll take it back.
Uh, uh, well, Cindy, I always give the guest the opportunity to have the very last statement to say whatever they want to the audience. So, Cindy, what would you say to those listening right now?
Well, because we advocate for caregivers in the workplace, I say you our goal is to make caregiving the most respected thing in the world. And so I think you start by showing up as a caregiver in the workplace and not being afraid to. And that's how we start to remove the stigma and the bias in the workplace. So be bold and I think you're some of the most resilient. I would hire caregivers in a heartbeat because they can do 1,000 things with grace. So yeah, that's my little piece of advice, I think.
Amazing. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for providing so much insight on caregiver supports in the workplace. And with Consul and how it's supporting folks. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been so nice chatting with you.
Of course. And to our listeners, thank you for being here as well. If today's conversation resonated with you, make sure to follow the Dementia Collective wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed if you haven't. And if you share this episode with someone might benefit, you never know how it will impact you or that person. And if you'd like to help us grow, please consider becoming a member of the Village on Patreon. Among the benefits, like the ability to ask questions to our guest, you'll get early access to every episode, plus the satisfaction of helping powerful voices like Cindy's reach more caregivers around the world. And finally, if you're on your own caregiving journey, remember, you are not alone. We're here at BlueBell to help connect you with the supports and resources that truly fit your family's unique needs. Until next time, remember, you are strong, you are not alone, and you're doing something that matters more than you know. I'll see you next time.